I really do think it is based upon her sense of God's call and God's desire for her in her life. She's going to be responsive to God. And God's called her to work for the people of India. She knows she needs to learn the language to do that. She breaks the norms of what the other missionaries are doing in their work for English-speaking people.
Hi, I'm Heidi, a historian and host of They Also Served, where we discover the lives of little-known women who made a big impact on Christianity in America and around the world. In the marketplace, on boats, and on streets, male missionaries found open doors. Men interested in hearing their message or reading their material. But when it came to entering people's homes, evangelizing women, doors were shut in their faces. In some countries, it went against their culture and customs to allow foreign men to talk to their daughters and wives. These closed doors provided an opening, an opportunity for missionary women. One woman, Burrus Burgess, specialized in opening doors. Edward Allen recently retired from serving as academic dean and professor at Union College in Lincoln, Nebraska. He has taught religious history for the last 18 years. Ed himself was a missionary in China and a pastor in California.
I first came across her name just simply from the histories of the Adventist work and saw that she was the first missionary in India. But I was doing research on the student volunteer movement for foreign missions and came across her name as a delegate to the very first convention the student volunteer movement had. Student volunteer movement was an interdenominational movement of Protestant Christians in America that gathered students and encouraged them to make commitments to mission service. Starting in 1888, I had a profound impact on mission work in America and around the world. And as I'm looking through the latter part of the report of the very first convention in 1891 in Cleveland, here is one delegate from California. And the delegate is from the Pacific Bible School, and the delegate is Georgia Burrus. And I knew the name. I knew she was an Adventist. I knew that she was interested in mission service, but what's the Pacific Bible School? And what's Georgia Burrus doing there?
The Pacific Bible School was a Bible workers' training school sponsored by the California Conference in the 1890s.
I suspect that Georgia attended it as a student and then came back as a teacher, because we find her in 1888 and she's associated with the Pacific Bible School. So in 1891, she's probably one of the teachers there, and she's the only delegate to this major convention of 2,000 students from California. Interesting thing is she also attended the 1894 convention. We have evidence of that from a discussion she had with H. Camden Lacey. And then she takes off for India in the summer of 1894. So that's what got me interested in her particularly, is what was the result of her inspiration at these conventions, these mission conventions, and what was involved in her call to missions, and particularly her call to India. She was born about 1866, and evidently her parents opposed her conversion to Adventism, but at age 16 she decides she's going to become a Seventh-day Adventist and does that.
Adventist missions didn't exist in a vacuum, and Georgia's story really highlights that. The student volunteer movement in foreign missions between its founding in 1886 to the 1920s inspired thousands of students to become foreign missionaries. In the 19th century, India was a focus of a lot of missionary activity for churches in North America and Great Britain. India was a colony of Great Britain from 1858 to 1947. Prior to 1858, the English had been involved in politics in the subcontinent through the East Indies Company and the trade of spices, cotton, and eventually tea. Interest in trade led to interest in evangelizing the people of India. Single missionary women followed missionary men and couples. Missionary men had found it difficult to evangelize Indian women, especially upper-class ones who culturally were not to associate with men unrelated to them. So single missionary women were deployed to evangelize women and later acted as teachers for girls' schools and as medical professionals to treat sick and pregnant women. These foreign missionary women not only were able to transcend physical boundaries and enter women's homes to evangelize, but also ultimately transcended gender boundaries and evangelized men as well.
I'm guessing it's in the next couple of years she joins with the Bible training school, this Pacific Bible School in Oakland, California, and attends the convention in 1891. I don't know how she found out about the Student Volunteer Movement Convention in 1891, but there was a report in the Review and Herald announcing the convention. So she must have read about it and said, that's something I want to do, and bought a train ticket and took herself to Cincinnati as a delegate from the Pacific Bible School. She was welcomed, and she saw a vision for missions there that was broad and deep, and she heard the very best of speakers talking about it. John R. Mott, there were others such as Hudson Taylor, Pearson A.J. Gordon, Geraldine Guinness, all of whom are leaders of the broad interdenominational Protestant mission work. And she's inspired by them. She says to H. Camden Lacey, these men are not Sabbath keepers as we understand it, but the Lord is certainly using them mightily. And I have never felt the deep moving of the Spirit of God upon my heart as I have here in this convention, 1894. So she is influenced by the greats of foreign mission service at the Student Volunteer Movement conventions. And she then refers to a number of people that she meets. She mentions Bishop Thoburn, who is a Methodist bishop. She's read his book about India.
While at the conference, she met Alice Ernst, a pioneer physician and missionary to India, who encouraged her in her desire to be a missionary and encouraged her to connect with the YWCA.
And she continued to see herself as part of this great missionary Protestant movement that's going to the whole world. Subsequent to that, she then heard S.N. Haskell speak about the great need for the women's work in India. And this was something that was evidently well known in Christian missionary circles, that particularly the upper caste women in India were confined to their homes and could never go out of those homes unless they were in a palanquin and couldn't see anything. So if you're going to do missionary work for these women in India, you had to be able to go into the home. It had to be a woman. They were called Zanainas. And Zanaina work was a recognized kind of mission work that women only could do in India. And evidently, Haskell's description of the need for this kind of work in India really appealed to Georgia Burrus, and she decided to dedicate herself to it. She then became Haskell's secretary, went back to school at Healdsburg College, and then went to Battle Creek College to gain training in medical work in order to continue the work, that kind of work in India, the personal work that she was going to do with the women in India.
Georgia Burrus was following the footsteps of other single women missionaries, including widow Charlotte White. In 1815, Charlotte, a Baptist, had been the first woman officially appointed as a missionary by any denomination or mission agency to go as a missionary to India. Because she was a woman, the American Baptist Board for Foreign Missions debated her appointment, granting it only because she would use her own money and would work as an assistant to a married missionary man. Charlotte learned Hindi and learned to read and write Hindi well enough that she wrote a Hindi spelling and grammar book. Eventually, Charlotte ran out of money and was unable to obtain financial aid from a missionary board to support her and had to return to America. Pioneer women missionaries from other denominations like Charlotte demonstrated that women missionaries were effective and could do work that men could not. The Seventh-day Adventist Foreign Missions Board learned from the experience of other foreign mission boards. Women like Charlotte paved the way for Georgia to go as Adventist missionaries. But like Charlotte, Georgia's deployment as a missionary to India did not start very smoothly. And like Charlotte, Georgia paid her own way.
She was assigned to travel to India with D.A. Robinson. He was going to be the first superintendent of the work in India. They traveled to London, and Robinson, for some reason, decided he needed to stay in London.
Robinson was not the only companion that was supposed to accompany Georgia to India that she lost. Myrtle Griffiths was supposed to be Georgia's missionary partner, but she'd fallen so ill during their training at Battle Creek that she had to drop out.
And Georgia said, I want to get to India. She wanted to learn the local language. So she got permission to travel to India a year ahead of Robinson and spend that time learning Bengali in Calcutta. And she paid her own way. So she gets on the boat, travels 33 days to Calcutta, expects to land in the city knowing nobody, and gets a letter a half hour before landing that there's an Adventist couple there in Calcutta that are about ready to leave, but they have a place for her. And she's excited, she's thrilled by that. Lands, these folks, the masters, meet her there. They take her to the room where she's going to stay that night, and it's already been rented out to somebody else, and she can't stay there. They have to scramble, try to find another room. She finds another room with a Scottish lady, but it's way too expensive. She can't stay there a long term.
Georgia understandably felt a little bit discouraged at this point.
As she's traveling to India alone on the ship, she drops her watch and it breaks. And she puts it in a box. She comes to this room in India where she's all by herself. And she has no idea how she's going to support herself. There's these other folks that are leaving the next 2 or 3 days, actually. And she prays, Lord, if you're here with me in India, please, I'd like my watch to work. She goes over to the box, pulls the watch out of the box, and it starts. And she says, God, thank you. I know you're here with me. I can do whatever you want me to do because I know you're present. You read some of the fear, some of the anxiety she's got. You can see her depression, her discouragement in these stories, and then how it seems to her that God has come in and made his presence known, and that's what she's going to go with. So she rents it for the night, and the next day ends up at the YWCA, Young Women's Christians Association, and they've got a room they'll rent her that's really inexpensive and that works well. And she settles down there for the year of learning the Bengali language. When she lands there, she believes that Bengali is spoken throughout India, and she can speak to any native person in all of India if she learns Bengali. So she learns Bengali, and she begins the Zenaina work, and Robinson shows up, and the other missionaries show up. But guess what? Their mission is almost entirely to English-speaking people, mostly foreigners. And they do make contact with English-speaking Indians, and they bring a descendant of I think a grandson of William Carey's converts into the Adventist church, because he already speaks English, fluent in it. But her burden is with the local work, the vernacular work, and she begins visiting the Zenainas and doing missionary work in Bengali.
Despite her anxieties, Georgia trusted God and worked fearlessly as a missionary. A lot of foreign missionaries focused on converting the European and American sailors, traders, and soldiers that inhabited the port cities. The language and cultural differences were seemingly an insurmountable barrier. But not for Georgia.
She saw her mission to the people of India, not to the merchants and the other English-speaking people in India. They eventually raise up an English-speaking church in Calcutta, and then there's a small group of Bengalis who are also meeting. We find in 1906 there's 76 English-speaking people in a church in Calcutta. For example, in the Zenaina work, she is visiting a family, and there's a couple girls in there, and one of the girls is pledged to get married to somebody. She's 12 years old and going to get married to somebody. And she's really interested in what Georgia shares. Georgia goes back. The other ladies in the building aren't that interested, and she comes back another time and discovers that only this one girl is present. And the girl says, hey, I want to become a Christian. How can I become a Christian? The family's totally opposed to it. And the next time she goes, they won't even let her see her. Then one day there's a knock on her door, and it's this girl. And the girl says, I've escaped. She actually had to climb up on the roof and drop down from the roof to get out of the house and run to Georgia Burgess's place. And that woman eventually is adopted by Georgia and becomes one of the significant Bengali missionaries in India.
But nonetheless, she made gradual inroads to evangelizing Bengali-speaking Indians. The first Indian Adventist convert in 1896, Kuroda Bas, and the first Hindu convert, Nanabala Bishash, both were converted directly due to Georgia's missionary efforts. The first years as a missionary for Georgia, though, were beset with challenges.
She arrived in India with $40 US. And that was what was to support her for her first year there. And a room at $1.25 a night was too much for her. So she also brought with her a lot of Adventist literature, which she sells to help support her. And so she does the call porter thing and helps support herself. My understanding is that by the time Robinson arrived in 1895, she then begins to receive a salary and get support for her work.
Another single woman, Martha May Taylor, arrived with the Robinsons to assist Georgia in her work. But Burrus realized that she had much more to learn to be an effective missionary to India.
By 1901, she's on a train station and passing out Bengali tracts, and everybody's flocking around her. And a guy comes up to her and says, "Hey, do you have anything in Hindi?" He says, "How are you going to reach the Hindi-speaking people if you don't have anything in Hindi?" "I guess I need to learn Hindi." So she takes it upon herself to move to a Hindi-speaking part of India. And by this time, she gets acquainted with a male missionary, Burrus Burgess, who arrives to be one of the treasurers. The local people get confused by Sister Burrus and Mr. Burgess. Their names sound so similar. And they said, "Aren't you guys together? He's single, she's single."
Only a year after his arrival in India, in 1902, Burrus Burgess and Georgia Burrus got married in the Adventist Chapel in Calcutta. Their partnership would last about 44 years. They never had children of their own, but their marriage would bear other fruit. Luther, shortly after their marriage, quit his job as treasurer and joined Georgia in working with a school and orphanage. Luther's ill health forced them to return to the United States in 1904. When he recovered, they wanted to return to India, but the mission board lacked money. So as Georgia had done a few years before, they decided to sell books to raise the funds. And when they returned to India, they turned to learning Hindustani and starting work in Punjabi.
They start 3 or 4 different schools over the years, and it's clear that he's helping her with this vernacular work. She moves to central India, learns Hindi, begins the translation of an Adventist tract into Hindi, and eventually they translate 10 different sermons, basically, into Hindi. This is the first time they've tried to sell them before they've given them the literature away. So they then get a bunch of call porters who are then selling these tracts in Hindi. It's quite a process that they had to find translators and find people to vet the translations and make sure everything was all set. There's a big headline in the Review and Herald, first vernacular sales of literature in India. So they print 10,000 copies of this tract, and the Hindustani believers then go out and sell it. And it's soon exhausted, and they print 20,000 more, and then another 20,000, and it's all sold. And pretty soon it's 100,000 copies of this very first Hindustani pamphlet are sold, and they get calls from Fiji and the West Indies and South America for these Hindustani pamphlets. And then, of course, they have stuff in Bengali as well. But this is really the beginning of the publishing work, the vernacular publishing work in India. And this is just the beginning of realizing that if we're going to reach them with the Adventist message, there's got to be literature in their local language. And then we have record that they translate the material into Urdu. They're starting an Urdu translation in 1906.
Their converts became significant members in the fledgling Seventh-day Adventist Church in India. For example, one of their Punjabi converts, John Last, became an enthusiastic evangelist. Tragically, he was arrested and beaten in 1911 for his evangelism and became the first known Indian Seventh-day Adventist to die for his faith. Georgia was determined, like John Last, to reach all parts of India.
And then they're translating something into Persian and getting that printed. In the meantime, she starts another school and another school. She ends up in Assam, which is the far eastern part of India that's mostly tribal people, and learns the language there and begins translating material into their language and getting it translated there too. So she really pioneers the printing and the vernacular work in at least 5 different languages in India while she's there.
Georgia's lack of money and her ambitious ideas meant that she had to get creative and pioneer new ways to support her schools and missions.
She founds these schools and she begins to go on furlough back to the United States and beg for money to support them. And she does that by saying, I've got one child. If you'll support this one child, I'll send you letters from that child. And she's the beginning. She may have got it from other Christian workers in India because she was always referring to her contacts with them, that this way of begging for money to support the children in her schools. There's a number of references to that in the 19-teens. As she's getting these schools started, helping to support them. And she does this almost entirely self-supportingly. I don't know how much she's supported by the church during this period of her ministry. She does have a license, a missionary license, and Luther does during some of this time, but how much the church is actually supporting financially her work, I don't know. And I don't know how you'd find that out.
As Georgia's story highlights, missionaries often had to get creative to get funding. The denomination wanted to send out missionaries, but they often lacked the money needed for their plans.
The Andersons, who were the first in China, are supported by the Wisconsin Conference. The General Conference doesn't give them any money.
Luther and Georgia founded numerous schools throughout India, and they impacted Adventism in the United States and globally through their converts. Although their focus was on converting Indians, a non-Indian family that they converted were the Hardings. The Hardings were introduced to Adventism through a vegetarian recipe book.
She has evangelistic meetings in the Harding home. It's probably her that they had some influence on the conversion of the Hardings.
The father of the family followed Georgia's lead, and he had religious material translated into Khasi, thereby converting the first Khasi-speaking Adventist. One of the Harding sons went on to establish new churches in England and Scotland and helped establish an international seminary in the Philippines. Another son, Mervyn Harding, became the founding dean of the School of Public Health at Loma Linda University. Georgia's enthusiasm for translating religious tracts into the local languages had a ripple effect felt globally.
She really had the vision and the drive to make that happen in a way that no one else has given her the credit for really founding the vernacular and the local work, the local people's work in India.
As with so many missionaries, they suffered increasingly from poor health as they aged. Antibiotics were not discovered until World War II, several years yet in the future, and vaccinations were limited as well. For example, there was no vaccination for polio, and smallpox hadn't been eradicated. Malaria was also a constant problem. Despite occasional health challenges and having to return to the United States to recover periodically, Georgia was a missionary in India from 1895 to 1934.
No, there was something about her character that at 16 she could say, Mom and Dad, I'm going to become a Seventh-day Adventist even though you don't think this is the right thing to do. God's calling me and I'm going to do what God calls me to do. There is a real deep sense of God's leading in her life and a sense that God's deeply involved in what she's doing. And she gets this sense of call that she first expresses and first is involved in the Bible work ministry and then training Bible workers in the late 1880s, early 1990s. But then she's called to this mission service and she enables a person to break social norms and just strike out on their own. But for her, I really do think it is based upon her sense of God's call and God's desire for her in her life. She's going to be responsive to God. And God's called her to work for the people of India. She knows she needs to learn the language to do that. And I think the vision for that comes from the student volunteer movement. She breaks the norms of what the other missionaries are doing in their work for English-speaking people. She goes into the Zenanas and wins converts there, encourages people to break the norms and move out of those Hindu restrictions. She sees herself as a missionary in those ways.
Zenanas have subsequently disappeared due to cultural and economic shifts and the influence of women like Georgia Burrus. Georgia's time in India changed her too.
The literature suggests that she deeply loved the Indian people. She identified with them. She had made friends with people there. It became a home for her. Like from a number of other missionaries in China and Africa, they just accept the people there and are accepted as part of the family. These are people that they have deep relationships with, that they care for, and they feel at home there. They only leave India because their health breaks. And their failing health in 1934, they're 68 years of age. She's 68 when she finally says, I can't stay. I need to go home because my health isn't good enough. And that's when she returns, settles down in the Paradise Valley area in Paradise Valley Sanitarium, and starts Bible studies. And keeps at it, and has a Bible study class, and more people are converted and brought to the Lord. And finally she dies in September 25, 1948. I see Georgia as somebody who has a deep personal devotion to Jesus and whose readiness to follow that devotion and follow Jesus wherever he may lead is universal. That's what I admire about Georgia, is her readiness to be open about her experience with God, to speak about how she's inspired by those who are not Adventists, but who are eager to follow God's calling in mission service. I also see her having a great deal of empathy. She describes numerous places the plight of the women in India. She has deep empathy for these women, and I think that's something that's universal, that touches my life.
Georgia Burrus was a pioneer. While missionary men found closed doors because men were not supposed to speak to Indian women not related to them, Georgia found an opportunity to meet women where they were. When language proved to be a barrier, she opened doors by learning new languages and making sure material was translated into the languages that people could read. Chronically short of funds, she found new ways to inspire people to give. Even years after she had to leave India, she was warmly remembered by the people she ministered to. At her death, the person who wrote her obituary, who was from India, noted that she was the missionary who had most thoroughly mastered an Indian language. Her legacy lives on in the Seventh-day Adventist Church in India, which she played such a crucial role to founding, and the vernacular translations she created and inspired others to create. The impact of her life on those around her was incalculably diffusive.
They Also Served is researched, written, and hosted by Heidi Olson Campbell. Thank you to our guest on today's episode, Dr. Edward Allen. This episode was produced by Heidi Olson Campbell and Heather Moore. They Also Served is edited by Nina Velato. Cover art and social media is by Chelsea Ernina. Stephen Husett is our equipment extraordinaire, and this show was executive produced by Adam Fenner. Thank you to the Adventist Learning Community for making They Also Served possible.